Good evening, everyone. Today is Monday, April 23rd. This is a special meeting of Lakewood City Council. We're just a few minutes after our scheduled start time of 6 o'clock. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Anderson, Bullock, George, here. Litton,
Here.
O'Leary,
Here.
O'Malley,
Here.
Rader.
Here.
Did I miss anyone?
Thank you. Do we have minutes to dispose of at this meeting, Madam Clerk? We don't? Okay. Well, then we will jump right into our first agenda item. First, I want to extend my thanks and the thanks of council to everyone in the audience for coming tonight. We, as always, appreciate your participation. We do have just the one item on our agenda this evening, which is our continued discussion of the One Lakewood Place term sheet. This evening's conversation will focus mostly on the financial aspects of that agreement and basically outlook for the project, et cetera. We're joined tonight by several guests, some familiar faces, some relatively new ones. Robin Minter-Smyers, counsel from Thompson-Hein, is here tonight, as well as Rustam Corey III and George Papandreas from Carnegie Development. We have, of course, our Planning and Development Director, Bryce Sylvester, Mayor, Finance Director, Jen Pei, and joining us this evening as well is Tracy Nichols from Project Management Consultants, and she will be providing the city her expertise as far as the project finances go and general expertise as former Economic Development Director for the City of Cleveland and many other titles along the way as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Director Sylvester to give us, get us started on the presentation. I also want to point out that there is a sign-up sheet for public comment over on the table. If you're inclined to do so at any point, please avail yourself of it, and we'll take public comment towards the end of the meeting once we've gotten through a little bit of the presentation portion. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and dear members of council. Thanks for having us for round two tonight. We had a lively discussion last week. Thanks for hosting us. Tonight, as Sam said, we are going to spend some time talking about the financials. Before we get into that, I did want to remind the group of our website, onelakewood.com/downtown development. We continue to use this to catalog and timeline where we've been, including last week's meeting. So we've posted the presentation that I gave. Also, an FAQs document is posted under that community update, and the video is posted. So if there are people that are looking to get caught up on exactly where we are today, our website is the place to do it. It also takes us back all the way to February of 2017, so you can see every step of the way on that website. So please keep using that and directing people there if they have questions about the process and how we got to where we are. So as Sam said, our agenda is simple tonight. We have a lot to talk about on two big items. The first is going to be the return on investment ROI calculation, which we've provided to City Council. I do have printouts. Would it be helpful if you guys had these on the stuff I emailed you? Does everybody have a copy of these? If you don't, we can just provide it.
I think we do, but
I'd appreciate a hard copy.
So what I'm handing out is what council received via email on Thursday of last week. This is the return on investment analysis that the city has conducted along with project management consultants to get to that $1.5 million figure, the $1.5 million in combined real estate and income taxes, which we'll talk a lot about tonight. The second item is going to be follow-up from a lot of questions that we got around the community gathering space last Monday, and I'll spend some time talking about that, and then we'll wrap it up with another question and answer session for the entire group. So I wanted to kick us off and just walk us through the sheet that I provided to you. I've also got it up on the screen for our members of the public that are here. Sorry, everybody, for the screen being so dim. So I just wanted to briefly walk you through what we conducted and what's on the sheet in front of you. So on the first page, titled Public Return on Investment Estimates for One Lakewood Place, there is two charts. One of them represents the amounts of estimated combined real estate and income taxes for Carnegie's Round 2 proposal. And that came out to about $2.3 million annually. And the second chart is if just the minimum development requirements are delivered, that combined amount is $1.4 million. The third chart on that front page is the city's return on investment. When we say return on investment, we are talking about payback. So when will the city get paid back for its investment in the project? As the term sheet is currently structured, the city is investing in this project through the value of the land. We are making the assumption that the value of the land is around $6 million. That is being informed by the fair market appraisal that was conducted at the Family Health Center site right across the street from One Lakewood Place development site. That site was valued at development-ready conditions at about $880,000 an acre. So if you pull that over to our 5.7 acres, and we added a little bit to it to be conservative, we get to the $6 million figure. We are confirming that with the fair market appraisal that's being conducted on the One Lakewood Place site, but I just wanted to make sure you knew how we got to that number. And then that gets you to the payback if the round 2 assumptions are delivered at 3 years and if the minimum development is delivered at 4 years. We did our best to show that in a graph. And so this chart shows you that the city's investment of around $5 or $6 million on the front end and how that would be paid back over time. Now this assumes that the project is constructed, so you're accumulating $1.5 million annually. But it's also meant to show the cumulative combined amount of public dollars that are generated out of this 6 acres over a period of 20 years. It is a significant amount of money that would be generated out of this site if it's developed. And again, this is the minimum deliverable. So we thought that this chart really spoke a lot for what all the analysis is on pages 2 and 3 on the sheets that are in front of you. So I'm not going to walk through these in detail tonight. I really want to open it up for questions as opposed to walking through these charts. But I did want to clarify a few things. There are assumptions that are made a part of this real estate analysis on page 2. It's really the only way to get to an estimate is to make assumptions at this stage. Our approach to those assumptions has been to be very conservative. We do not want to be in a position where we're over-promising public funds that are going to be generated out of a site. So we tested ourselves. We talked to our tax department and our finance department, and we think that these are conservative numbers that are in front of you. And we thought that that was an important distinction to make tonight. So again, this takes the same format as the first page. The first chart is Carnegie's Round 2 proposal if delivered, and the second chart is the minimum development requirements if delivered. The assumptions are in small type font. I apologize about that to get it on one page at the very bottom. But it talks about how we got to some of those numbers and explains maybe each section, residential, office, retail, and how we're making those assumptions for real estate taxes. Your third page is the income tax analysis that we conducted. Again, broken down in a very similar fashion where you've got Carnegie's round 2 assumptions as the high mark and the minimum development requirements as the low mark. In this particular analysis and throughout this project, income taxes are generated through the new housing units that are constructed, and the income taxes generated by the jobs created in the office and retail spaces. One assumption that we thought was important to make is that we made a salary assumption by unit, so not necessarily by person. You'll see that there are two different calculations here. Example in Carnegie's round 2 assumptions, the first chart in the top left-hand corner, we put in 140 apartment units. We think that that could be about 175 people, but we assumed the salary by unit, not necessarily by person. And that is an example of us trying to be conservative about what these estimates might be. So before we turn it over to question and answer, I was going to turn it over to Tracy to weigh in a little bit on the analysis and also talk through some projects that she's worked on in the past, and then we can have some Q&A after that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Is that on?
Yep.
Okay. I apologize, I have a cold, so my voice is a little bit froggy. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the return on investment. I think that the way that Bryce has gone about this is the appropriate way. It really just looks on the cash-on-cash return. So how much money comes back to Lakewood? And that's very important. But I do want to point out there is something called the multiplier effect, which is something that's really hard to quantify and measure. But you know when you add new employees to your downtown area that they're going to go out, they're going to buy a sandwich, they're going to get their dry cleaning done, they may have their kids dropped off and changed to daycare here, whatever the case is, but people start spending their money in the community more when you have this type of development. So the community should really understand that there will be more returns than this, although this is a really good chart. And I would say that if I could bring that in, I would think it's a good project for a community. And I want to talk a little bit to estimating the value, because I think that's something that most people want to know, well, how much is it going to be worth? When you build it, what will it be worth? Well, the county fiscal officer will tell you that no one can assign value except the county fiscal officer. And you can ask till you're blue in the face, but they will not try to tell you what they think it will be worth until it's done. They do that based on the permits that are pulled for the dollar amounts. And it's a very intricate process, so it's over a period of time. It really usually takes at least 2 years to come to full value on the duplicate. And as you know, taxes are collected a year in arrears, so it might take 3 years to fully hit. But the important thing is that you have to make an estimate when you're doing these types of projects, because we all know that our taxpayers, we're accountable to them. They want to know, what is that return? So I thought I would tell you, we ran through numbers with Bryce to help with this analysis, but I thought I would go through some of the TIFs that we did in the city of Cleveland and just tell you that we came pretty close with almost every TIF. So the Westin Hotel, we estimated the value would be $43.5 at the beginning. It was $48.9 right now on the duplicate, so it's been open for a while. It's stabilized, as we like to say. Midtown Tech Park, that's in the health tech corridor, we estimated $13.6 million. It's $14.3 million. Or the 7,000 Euclid building, also in health tech corridor, we estimated $4.8. It's $6 million. 6555 Carnegie, also in the health tech corridor, $5.8 million. It's $5.9 million on the duplicate. And the University Circle Marriott, we estimated $17,160,000. And it's on the books right now at $17,169. It's pretty good. The one we were off a little bit on was the Calfee building, maybe because it's a law firm. A lot of very expensive finishes don't always add to value, because we estimated the value at $25 million. It's only $16 million. So on that one, I'd have to assume that just the types of materials they use, we really look at the construction materials and the cost of construction when we're trying to make these estimates. but the county auditor is going to look at what is the actual value of the building, and sometimes putting in really high-end finishes, you know, when you have your own house and they tell you, you know, maybe don't put in the super huge kitchen because you may not get all your money back. That's the similar type of thing here. But for the most part, we've been pretty spot on being able to guesstimate using the numbers that we have based on construction to come up with what we think it'll be worth. So I think that the numbers that Bryce has worked with us on are going to be fairly accurate for the project. So that just gives you a little bit of an analysis. The other thing I just wanted to make sure that council knew is that right now we're in a very volatile economy. With the stock market going up and down like this, it's a time where banks are getting very concerned. I'm working in another community, and the banks have told me they don't want to do any projects that have retail in them. And so it's a real concern for us, and it should be a concern for you guys, because right now we've got a developer who looks like they've got financing in place ready to go, but further delays, I just want to caution you, could be problematic. So keep it in mind. As someone who lived through the flats, it was all ready to go, but for a few pieces of land, and boom, we missed the mark, and 34 layers of financing later, we pulled it up and got only the first phase to go, and now it's in multiple phases. So I'll just say to you to keep that in mind. The market is prime now. Lakewood is hot. People are very interested in Lakewood. I think they'll probably say at Carnegie that there's been a lot of people very interested in businesses coming here. So I think just keep that in mind as you're looking at what's facing you today, that right now you're hot, the market's ready, you've got financing. So keep that in mind as you're going through your motions.
Thank you. Director Sylvester, did you have any additional comments, or are you planning Q&A at this point?
Q&A would be great, Mr.
Okay.
Chair. Thanks.
Ms. Minters-Myers, did you have anything to add at this point? Great. Well, I guess we'll just dive right in. Are there any council members that would like to do the honors? Councilman Rader.
I'll break the ice. Thank you all for coming again tonight. To help me understand just how this works with, because I know the lion's share of this is going to be returned in the form of tax dollars towards the school district, which is great for the school district. But can you explain to me, maybe in Cleveland, when you're talking about return on investment, are you talking about dollars returned to both the school district and the city when talking about these proposals, or is this common the way this is done, I suppose, in terms of, because to me it seems like, you know, again, not that it's bad, but this is city-owned property, and I would want to make sure that, you know, the city is getting its return, I guess, on the investment first, right?
Well, I mean, obviously, the voters have indicated what the breakdown of taxes should be in your community. But in Cleveland, we've always looked at the schools. We have a policy of non-school TIFs when we do a TIF. We don't touch the schools because we feel the education is so important. So while the school gets the lion's share of all real estate taxes in the state, that's how this state has decided to fund schools, we always look at that as a positive to the community, and we count that in our analysis of return on investment to a city. And most other state of Ohio cities do that as well. So Cincinnati, Columbus, everyone does the same thing. If it's to the city or if it's to the schools, that's both a win for the actual city.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other, yes, Councilwoman George?
Thank you, and thank you, everybody, for being here tonight, and thank you, Director Sylvester, for the presentation on the financials. I do have some question on that, but I want to kind of take a step back a bit and talk about the timeline for the project a little bit. I know when we discussed last meeting that we wanted to get this wrapped up in May in order for the Carnegie team to go and bid, if you will, the project in time for the Vegas convention. And I know that Carnegie, you know, you guys have gone there previously. We don't really need a finalized deal for them to go bid the project, correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay,
As long as we've got an understanding that you're on board with the term sheet, which is really what we're trying to achieve here with these meetings, we're going to move forward at that convention and pursue whatever opportunities there are for the project.
okay.
Well, to be clear, though, an executed term sheet is an important step.
Yes, it's the term sheet that we're seeking, not the development and use agreement, just to clarify, yeah.
Thank you for that. Wouldn't a non-binding letter of intent, maybe from the administration, from the mayor, wouldn't that be sufficient to bid the project out when you go to the convention in May? It's my understanding of.
I think we should clarify what happens at that convention. You don't go there and bid it.
No, we don't. That's
I'm
a good
sorry.
point. No, this is what they call the International Council of Shopping Centers International Convention that's held every year. This particular convention is really just a mecca where everybody congregates and they kind of just introduce themselves. They have a leasing mall where they go and they talk about their various properties. Every retailer usually in the world will attend this usually. They meet with them, they identify and sell the product, try to sell the product, and arrive at what we call at least an opportunity to put your foot in the door, if you will, enter into a letter of intent that would be non-binding, as you were just suggesting. But it's really just a venue for us to vet and to identify the opportunities for the project. But in so doing, it's part of what we do, and it's part of our credibility. And that really is very, very important to us. We want to be in a position when we go and make these representations that we're out here selling this particular product and trying to get you interested, that indeed we have the authority to do that. And so, that's why it's important for us to at least have, at the very least, a sign-off on the term sheet.
Okay.
Just
So,
a point of clarification, that a term sheet and a letter of intent, those terms are oftentimes used sort of interchangeably. They're both a reference to a document that is non-binding typically. You can do a binding term sheet or letter of intent, but they're typically non-binding, and they're something that has a good amount of detail, but not all of the detail that you might find in a binding agreement. So this term sheet draft, we could have called it a letter of intent, and it would have looked the same.
And we're aware of that. We know and recognize that the term sheet is similar to a letter of intent being non-binding, but to see that we have your acquiescence here is what we are moving forward on, and obviously taking a risk to some extent because there isn't really a legally binding commitment on either of our parts. But it gives us enough, we feel, comfort level, and we are partners on this project, and we believe that, with, your involvement and your confirmation of this term sheet, that's enough for us to go and start making those inquiries and seeking those opportunities.
thank you. So I guess what I'm getting at is my preference wouldn't be to rush this kind of through in the next couple meetings by May. I'd kind of like to extend it out because I think there's a lot of questions and a lot of information to dive through, and I don't want to hurry it. I want to make sure we're making the best decision in the end for this massive project that's going to be in the middle of Lakewood. It's going to be, something that's going to be around for hopefully 100 years. So I don't want to, rush this and get it in the next couple weeks. So that's kind of what my thought is with that.
Just a reminder, though, if I may, Council President.
Sure. Mayor
That
Summers,
we have
then-
been working on this process for 15 months, so this is hardly a rush. I realize you haven't been here for 15 months, but the project has.
Councilman O'Malley, did you have a comment?
There are other reasons besides the May convention, too, that presses us for time a bit. Could you talk a little bit about those, Bryce, or whoever else might?
Yeah, I can start us
Talk
off.
construction season. We talked about some of the financials, things like that.
Yeah, I'll start us off, and then I'll turn it over to George to weigh in on what we're calling our master schedule. I'll start it with, we live in Cleveland. We are in a cold climate, which means that we get 8 months, 9 months, if we're lucky, of good construction season. If you miss a fall or a spring or a summer in the moment, it doesn't feel like it's a big delay, but when the snow flies in November, it is. It does impact how you approach schedule for projects. And then that has a ripple effect down the line. So let me just give a practical example of this. We want to land an office tenant, and the Carnegie team is in a position where they need to commit to a date on that office tenant. Office tenants don't have 6 months of wiggle room. You know, they have lease structures to come up against, and they're really interested in a project, and they want a general commitment from a team on when they could move in. If we miss a season, a winter, then it can delay and maybe even jeopardize us landing an office tenant. So that's a practical example of how timely decisions impact a smooth execution of filling the space up, which is what is one of our primary goals. The construction schedule as it's set right now is a term sheet approved in May, allows us to begin working on the development and use agreement. It allows us to start the planning and zoning process, which we think is going to take between 6 and 10 months. It also allows us to move forward with confidence on the abatement and demolition of the properties, which would occur this fall. If that happens, if we start this fall, then it'll allow the Carnegie team to start on construction in in the spring or early summer of 2019. That would put them in a position to tenant the building by the fall of 2020. I'm looking to these guys for help on that. I think that's the general timeline. So more than 2 years from now, we would have a first tenant in if a term sheet is approved in May. The project would be filled by 2021. So I would offer up even the same thing that we brought up last Monday, which is a think back, that's 4 years from now. Think back 4 years ago. The marketplace was strong, but it was a lot different. So decision points like a term sheet being approved is very critical and will impact that first tenant coming in. And so if we get the execution of the term sheet in early May, we have confidence that fall of 2020, we're going to start to see some tenants in this property. If we delay that, it will push that date. George, Rustam, I don't know if you guys have any additions to that.
I think you hit it pretty well there, Bryce. Our prospects are asking for when we can deliver. And if we have any kind of vacillation in that regard, it automatically puts us at a disadvantage. They have their own itinerary, their own schedule, their own critical concerns in order to run their business, not the least of which is knowing that they can get into a space and conduct business in a timely fashion. And so we, when we enter into our negotiations, have to be in a position to know how we can do that. It's what we do. It's, it's really what our expertise is. But when we're dealing with situations like we are here today, with this type of a project that invites all of your input and comment, we have to be at least sensitive and cognizant that it's not an unlimited time line that can just be analyzed. And we have been pursuing this, as the mayor had indicated, for some time. And at some point, we need to know, knowing what our critical path is, how and when we can move forward so that we can make these commitments. To speak to Tracy's point for a second, on top of that, the financial markets are very volatile. There are ever-changing ebbs and tides in connection with what the banks are doing. The interest rates are fluctuating. All of these go directly to our analysis and projections on the profitability and financial strength of this project. It affects our ability to timely deliver in many other ways as well. When we go and say to a tenant, we can get you in by a certain period of time, we need to know that we're going to start locking in rates at a certain point. So there's all these dynamics that are involved with this kind of approach, not the least of which, as Bryce was mentioning as well, the impact that potentially weather could have on those costs. So a lot of that is very, very time sensitive, and we really need to be cognizant of that.
We discussed this last time, but when, if best case scenario, when would an abatement and demolition contract come back before us?
August.
Okay. Pushing it any later than that could be problematic.
Yeah, and so that's a great point, Councilman. Cleveland regional economy is doing well, and so we will compete for that work. B&B Wrecking, Site Tech, Precision Environmental, these teams are going to be bidding on a lot of projects. And so we're assuming that they can start in the fall. But because Cleveland is such a busy real estate market right now, we may have to compete for that schedule. And so those delays could push us beyond the fall.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I would just add, I guess, from my perspective on the process, that I don't think it's council's intention to give short shrift to this issue. But with that being said, I think that as we move through our deliberations, we're in our second meeting tonight considering the proposed version of the term sheet, and I think that as we go through these meetings, hopefully we'll find that our questions are being answered. I think that there's frankly been a ton of progress in that regard to date. I know that a lot of council members have availed themselves fully of opportunities to meet with the administration directly or, Director Sylvester, the law department, whatever they need to do to get questions answered. And so I think that given the considerations that are relevant here that were just recounted, as long as we can work diligently to make sure that we're answering questions, I think that, the span of a little over a month for us to consider this, or about a month for us to consider this in its entirety, I think is appropriate, and we'll see, as we go forward. But I think at least for this point in time, I don't feel like we're rushing anything by continuing to ask questions and get them answered.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilman Litton.
I would only add to that or piggyback on that, that, if we've got a month plus to work with and we've got 3 or 4 meetings on the calendar, we can easily make that 6 or 7 or 8 meetings within that same time frame if necessary to get all of our questions answered, though. I'm sure we'd like a night off here and there.
Yeah, I think I saw Bryce's eyebrows go up a little bit. But I think it's a point well taken. The bottom line is that we can provide as much time for deliberation as we need to provide within the calendar duration that we have in front of us.
We're here to answer as often, as many questions as you have, so.
Thank you. We do appreciate that. All right. Are there other questions from council regarding anything that we've heard tonight as far as the financials go? I'll jump in with just a couple here. One is with respect to the salary assumptions on the apartment and townhome units that go into the calculations for the city's return on investment. I assume that those are where they are because partially they're tied to what the rents or housing prices will be for those units. Because I wouldn't want someone to look at that figure and say, well, that's a rosy portrayal, because we all know that the average renter in Lakewood isn't making $75,000 a year. But it's important to note, I guess, or my assumption would be that that is baked in because for that housing unit, that would be a fair assumption.
That's correct. Yeah, we took, Carnegie actually, in their analysis for their round 2 submittal, informed some of those assumptions. We challenged those assumptions on our side and actually lowered some of them to be more conservative. We worked with the tax department to just peg this against some other projects that have happened already. So McKinley Place, the Lakewood Center North Apartments as a couple of examples, just to check in on what kind of income is coming out of the units. But Councilman, that is reflective of what the rents would be. That's correct.
Thanks. The other question I had with respect to the chart is year 1 on the chart, and this actually ties into the whole timing conversation that we were just having, but year 1 on the chart would be essentially from the development agreement being signed, I would assume. And partially I'm asking that because, we talked about the fact that revenue-wise, this would be very, very conservatively a 5-year return on investment for the city. But obviously, when you look at the chart, that's really hitting more in year 8, 9 range for the total project. So presumably, that's because there's the run up there where the project isn't built yet? Or
Correct.
tenanted yet?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're front-loaded on the city's investment in the project, and then to get to full income and real estate tax generation, that's where you see some of that delay.
Great, thank you. Other questions, Councilman O'Malley?
You refresh my memory. The residential requirement is 140 units or 100,000 square feet. Does that include both the apartments and the townhomes?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Do we still have a clerk somewhere? Oh, Mayor, thanks.
I could be a clerk.
No. I'll,
You have an opening.
I'll track that down. I'm gonna, it's my intention, I think, as we're perhaps starting to wind down, I don't know, I was gonna go grab the sign-up sheet, if that's an appropriate time to do that.
I'd like to comment, if I may, on one important point. It's important for the city of Lakewood, all its citizens, to ask and answer the question, what's in it for me? So this is a big development on a fairly small percentage of our land mass, ultimately directly affecting maybe a pretty small percentage of 52,000 people, because maybe there's a couple thousand that might live and work here. It's a large number, but as a percentage, it's not the whole city. So what's in it for the citizens of Lakewood? And the answer is consistent with everything in a community like Lakewood. Anything that takes financial pressure off the household and how we fund both our schools and our governments is an important element of investment. So in Lakewood, when I hear often we pay a lot of taxes, ultimately what they're saying is the property tax, because our income tax is really among the lowest in the county. So the real issue is the property tax. But by adding this valuation to our tax base, it ultimately would allow the school district to raise our taxes probably slower. Will it reduce taxes? Not likely. But in the future, as a practical matter, if they were to ask for a 3.9 mil levy without this project, they might be able to ask for a $3.6 million levy. What that means is every citizen, every homeowner, every taxpayer in Lakewood, property tax owner, I should say, would pay less than they would otherwise. That's important. Everything we can do to shift that burden away from the household is a good day's work in a city like ours. This city disproportionately has agreed to tax itself and rebuild its schools in its future. That's a monumental stake in the future, but there's a cost to it. And we feel that pressure of that cost. So when I think of economic development as a major goal, what I think about is creating the capacity of the tax base to support the government and ultimately its schools and a few other entities such as our metro parks, our health and human service levies, and our port in ways that become less burdensome. That's an important goal, and it's a never-ending goal because it's not a sure bet in every way. You don't keep what you did 10 years ago. What you did 10 years ago may leave, and you got to replace it. That's hard work. If you can replace it and expand it, that's good work. So here, we're talking about just that type of investment to shift that burden as much as we can in the future from the homeowner of Lakewood. That's what's in it. And then we talk about the vibrancy. That's an important element too. And we know in this city that our citizens appreciate and they have enjoyed the benefit of a vibrant downtown. This will make it even more so, and that will make it even more of a destination. In fact, this past week I saw a presentation from an environmental design group that talked in particular about what the millennials, which is the largest percentage of population group we have in our town, and what do they expect and what do they aspire to invest in. And more than anything, more than past generations, they want to invest in experiences. They put a premium on that. And those experiences really are about shared experiences on a local place. So part of what we're investing here is a capacity to meet that expectation of a population group that's driving vibrancy to every city in the country, including Lakewood. And that's an important element.
Thank you. Yes, Councilman Liddon.
Thank you. I noted, I think, a discrepancy in the frequently asked questions that we're using a $1.2 million figure for the tax revenue. Correct me if I'm wrong, but just so we're all singing the same tune.
Oh, I think, sorry, I don't mean to jump all over it, but that might be the 1.2 in property versus 300,000 in income.
Ah, that could be.
for a 1.5 total? Correct me if I'm wrong, but.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Councilman Linden's question 8. What is the financial benefit to the average homeowner and renter in Lakewood? And we could work on maybe clarifying that, because if you are reading it that way, that means a lot of people might be too. So maybe we'll work on rewording that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yes, Councilman Rader.
Yeah, if I could change topic just quickly, because I see we have a lot of our friends here from the building trades, and I had asked a question last week. I just want to kind of follow up on the question about the use of union labor in this project. And Dan O'Malley had told me this week that you guys use Turner Construction, and I just want to make sure we have assurances that this will be like wall-to-wall union. 'Cause you know, when things are built union, they're usually built right, and I want to hear that from the developer.
Turner Construction is our general contractor. They are on the team, and as you know, they are a union contractor. The way we generally, our plan is to take this project and approach it as a one-point source of responsibility with the GC, and there's a lot of benefit, we think, from a control point of view, a liability point of view, a management point of view. You know, obviously Turner then would, through its subs, implement the same type of protocols.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. President.
Yes, Councilman Bullock.
Thanks. I simply want to explain to my colleagues in the audience that my late arrival is due to a pre-scheduled neighborhood meeting with residents that had been rescheduled twice already before this special meeting was called, and I didn't want to move it on the neighbors again. So that's the reason for my late arrival. Thanks.
Thank you. So I guess we'll continue if there's additional Q&A from council members at this point. Yes, Councilwoman George.
Thank you.
Sure.
Just in regards to public financing, are we going to be, what sort of loans or grants or what have you are we going to apply for, or are we not going to apply for? Just kind of get a better understanding of that portion.
We don't have specifically which programs we're going to apply for. I'll tell you, we'll be talking to the County Department of Development. We'll be talking to the State Department of Development. We'll be talking to Team NEO as the representative of this region's Jobs Ohio program to be a part of this project. So those are 3 examples that will start. They're in a similar position that a lot of the tenants are in that they're looking for us to have an executed term sheet before they'll start those conversations. So that's another example of why this is such a critical step.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions?
But Bryce, to clarify, the term sheet does not require the city to come with any additional public subsidy sources. You're going to be exploring sources of public support that are available for the demo and abatement work that the city is going to be undertaking. And of course, you want to be helpful to the developer if there are other additional sources of funding that are available to support the project. Those can be helpful towards what counts as their equity contributions. But the commitments that Carnegie is making are not tied to the city bringing those dollars to the table. This is really a commitment around cooperation, collaboration, and doing the best we can to deliver as many sources as possible to deliver a high-quality project, but it's not a requirement of moving forward. So one of the things that was so attractive about Carnegie's proposal for this project is that they were not looking for ongoing sources of public subsidy in connection with the development.
If I could add to that as well, many of these dollars are tied to job creation, almost all of them, in fact. And so you can only actually pitch for these dollars when you have a specific project or tenant in mind that says, I'm willing to consider seriously moving to this place, bring my jobs there, and my expectations that I will increase those jobs. Will you help me to fund the build-out of my space? That's the conversation that happens further down the line. And again, we need this step to begin to be able to start the recruitment process for tenants. And in those conversations and negotiations, we might be able to help achieve success of a commitment together. Might, but it's not guaranteed, and nor is it assured or required. But we would want to be in that position if we can. These dollars show up all over the state. We'd like to get our share if we can, but there's no assurance. Maybe, Tracy, you have more comment to that.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that the most important thing that needs to happen for this project is to get committed tenants. And that means the ability for the developer to be able to say, I can have this space ready for you on X date. And when people are out looking for tenants for new construction projects like these, or big renovation projects, large scale, you win when you get large tenants in, not when you put together 20 small tenants. You need large tenants. Everyone is competing for the same tenants. I think Lakewood has what it takes to really get the good big tenant here, because it's a walkable community. It's what everybody wants. It's the whole reason why downtown Cleveland, where everyone was leaving, people are now coming back. But Lakewood has that, but it has it in such a way that it's so walkable and it's such a genuine neighborhood that people are going to love that. But you've got to know when it's ready, and because you're sitting on something I think that's really hot, and you've got to know when it's ready, and you also need to be able to find, okay, how many jobs, so we can get what's needed to get these people in here. It's not coming from you, but coming from other places. So I think that it's really critical to get to the point where these guys can go out and say, yeah, we're ready to go in Lakewood, and here's what we can offer, and here's the space, and here's the price. And we're a ways from that, but you got to get stuff signed and really know what's going to happen. Because it's a big rumor mill out there, and all of the people looking are like, is that project in Lakewood going to happen? How long, is that going forward? That's what the rumor mill is talking about between all the brokers, everyone who needs to market your community is talking about it. So they want to know, you know, get it in the newspaper. Yeah, we're signed, we're ready to go, we're starting.
Thanks. Councilwoman George?
And you bring up tenants, so I know, what's the focus? Because I'm still, my worry a lot about this project still is around retail. And I know a lot of others have expressed concern about retail. It's changing, as we all know. So when you're going out looking for tenants, are you focusing on retail tenants more, office tenants? Where's your focus at?
Actually, our focus is on the office tenant. We've always recognized that as the driver, the economic driver to the project. We think the retail component is going to fall in place. To the extent that we're focusing on retail, it's only for tenants that we think the community needs. And I see that really as going hand in hand with whatever we ultimately would pursue in connection with the office. It's that type of synergy that we think is really what makes the mixed-use project a very vital and viable project. So there are, different ways of approaching each of them, but our primary effort is to really try and get that office tenant,
Good.
the anchor office tenant.
Good, that's good to hear, so.
And just to elaborate and pick up on everything that was said by everybody here, just in connection with this, what Tracy said, what the mayor said, what Bryce said, and what Robin said, can't emphasize enough the timing. That's really what we're talking about here. The timing and our ability to move forward to address all of these concerns is absolutely fundamental and critical.
And yet, let me, I'm not looking to, I understand construction season. I'm not looking to push it back. I was just, construction, I thought we talked about around August, so, and that's on the city. So I'm not looking to defer this a year, 6 months, what have you. I'm just saying, if it didn't get done in time for Carnegie to go out to, to the convention, what have you, that it didn't appear that it would be the end of the world if you were. We're still able to move ahead with construction, still move ahead with the timeline. So I wanted to clarify that a little bit.
Mr. Chair.
I'm not looking to delay this.
Is there a direct response to that? And then Councilman Bullock, do you have something to add to that question?
I want to reply that it's a good line of questioning, and thank you, Councilwoman George. I think what we're hearing from the experts is that to help them help us, we want to hit the timelines that can market and begin to line up the anchor tenants who will then leverage all the financing that needs to happen for the construction to move forward. So I think it is crucial that we work to get through whatever deliberations council needs to get through by our, Sam, I forget, is it late May? It's early
May,
June.
I think. Early May.
Early May.
Looking at
May.
Okay,
May
so,
7th, I think, or May
so we've got an intensive,
14th.
the ideal is that we would work in an intensive manner in the next several weeks to get through what we need to get through so that we can hit that, so that they can do essentially their marketing and their, that might be a crude term, I apologize to the real estate professionals here, but they need to get out there and they need to give some kind of certainty. So it's less the construction timelines, I think, and more the negotiation of agreements in principle, at least, that some of the major payers into this project, and the commercial office seems to be the core of it all, can start to be lined up. So personally, I think we can hit that, and we want to hit that. We're deliberating, but we're deliberating in a public forum that's been publicly noticed, so that's what this is for. So I think it's crucial that we do that, and you know, we've got all this information to enable us to get there. If I may ask a tenant question or two, ideally, George, is it one tenant, three tenants? Could be any mix of those, and for the commercial office.
Yeah, I mean, currently, our concept design contemplates approximately 25 to 30,000 square feet of floor. And ideally, we'd love to find a single tenant to take us all 4 floors.
Okay, because that's just simplest, or, although that's most subject to, that's all your eggs in one basket.
I mean, we are entertaining right now a particular tenant that wants to take an entire floor plate. That's the kind of tenant that would be sufficient for us to probably move forward with the project. And in that capacity, you're going to have basically the need to build the office floor, which means everything below it's going to have to be built as well, obviously, unless we do it with skyhooks or something.
So there's 3 or 4 office floors,
There are
depending
4.
on how the negotiations go, or 4.
There are
Okay,
4, there
there
are 4 office floors, that's correct.
Okay. And if things go super swimmingly, you could add even more, or we're capping it at 4?
We have a rooftop floor, which we kind of are looking as an opportunity, but we haven't firmly designated it as a floor per se. But
And
it would
you're
the
going to be
7.
talking to people this year about occupancy 3 years out.
That's right. And
And
that's
That's
this is-
industry standard.
And so when we go and we try and market, as you put it, which I think it's an appropriate term, you need to be canvassing the type of prospect that is looking, because either they're growing or they've got different needs, their leases are expiring. There are a whole host of issues that they need to address now and understand, and that we can start planning for, because a lot of these would be build-to-suit in many form or fashions. We'd have to establish what their finishes are, what their character is, and that's going to be a hand-in-hand type of exercise that we'll be doing along with the ABR and along with Planning Commission as we move forward on this thing. But that will be the driving factor.
Okay, and another way to put it, though, is if we get these private sector negotiated agreements in place, that's what provides the financing, rather than having to rely on public sources or partial public sources or grants or anything like that. So ideally, we tee it up for successful private sector contracts, and that's the seed of the financing that's all done in the private. My final question would be, how common or uncommon is it to have a proposal for a project of this scale without public financing component as a major dimension? Tax abatement or any form of public financing? And there's probably like 3, the big Crayola crayon box type numbers of different forms of public financing, right?
Right, in the state of Ohio, it's unusual to find a project of this scope and size without more public subsidy. I mean, the land obviously is helpful, but generally for a project of this size, we would see a TIF. Whether it's Columbus, Cincinnati, or Cleveland, you would see that type of additional funding be required to really get over the hump. So I think from what we saw from other proposals, this was really the best and strongest proposal that came in and is the best return for the city and the taxpayers of Lakewood.
Right, and if we were providing carve-outs or rebates or tax abatements, that would basically come right out of the hide of the school district, as well as the city and the library system and every other public entity in this place. So if we can make this successful as proposed, we're getting tax growth benefits to our community across the board sooner than later. So that's a priority, I would think. Thanks.
Councilman Rader, and then after that, if there's no objection from fellow council members, normally we would take the docket comment before we vote, but since we're not going to be voting tonight, my thought was that maybe we could go ahead and take the docket comment, and then if we want to spend some more time for follow-up after that, we can do so.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just as a reminder, we did want to work through some of the community gathering space items in addition to the financial analysis. So certainly happy to keep going down the Q&A for financial stuff, but I'd also like to spend some time talking about the community gathering space too.
Thank you for that reminder. Then in that case, why don't we have Councilman Rader, docket, agenda comment, and then maybe after that we can segue into the community gathering space discussion. Councilman Rader.
Thank you. So why isn't the amount of money that's set aside in the master agreement with the Cleveland Clinic to raise the land, prepare it for the developer, why isn't that not counted? What's the explanation for why that's not counted as money the city's investing in this project?
Yeah, I'll look to the mayor and Jen maybe to weigh in on that too.
It is counted because the $6 million value of the land is $6 million for a development-ready site. So that value with a current single-use structure on it, with its particular age and design, has very limited to almost no value. The question is who would buy it as it is today, given the nature of what it's designed to do. And what its investments we've learned would be to make it functional in even a medium way. It's, from a practical standpoint, when the city gets the keys, which would be likely August 1st, we have costs. So it's a liability to the city. We have to secure it. We have to insure it. We have to have minimal maintenance to it to make it safe, and then figure a way to control it. So if it's a piece of land, we have none of that, practically speaking. It's an open piece of land. So the value of $6 million comes from spending the $7 million to put it in a position where it's worth $6 million. So I hope that makes sense to you.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just comment on that as well. That's very common when you receive free land as a government, that there's some type of money with it to fix whatever problem was there. And we never count that in the ROI because it was really set aside specifically for the work that has to be done prior to being able to sell the land. So we generally don't count that in an ROI analysis in any place that I've ever been.
Would it be fair to ask, maybe we could take this offline, but I would like to see examples of that, if that's okay, just so I can kind of get my head around it. Is that something that?
I'll try to think
Maybe,
of a couple and get something to you.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Thanks. Councilwoman George, do you have a quick follow-up?
Yeah, I do, just because something that Councilman Rader and the mayor talked about, the $6 million that the city's giving. Did we ever evaluate leasing the land to a developer and then getting, a lease agreement year after year, and so the city maintains the actual land?
That is a model. I'll let Tracy spend more time on that, but in fact, Cleveland Heights is doing just that. They have a 100-year land lease. Europe does it all the time with a 100-year land lease. In this particular case, the advantage to the city is that it does add, again, to the property value that's taxable by contributing it. So while we may offer to an investment, that $6 million is part of basically the residual value that will ultimately be taxed. So we get paid back through that mechanism as opposed to a lease rate. And I presume that Cleveland Heights, they're paying nothing for the land lease as a matter, but it does give a long-term control. But that is an option. It's not one that we've considered here seriously.
Are we too far down the path to look at that option?
Well, let me just add a little other layer of why land leases are problematic. And many of you may be familiar with Chagrin Highlands. And so the model in Chagrin Highlands was that the city owns land in another location, not in the city. And the model that was established under then Mayor Voinovich was that we would sell a certain amount of land. After that, it would be all land leases. Well, what happened was we sold all the required land and everything came to a grinding stop. And the reason is, and this is the reason that has impacts just about everywhere in our region, is that we have so many costs to overcome that financing becomes extremely difficult when you don't own the land. I'm working on a project right now in Richmond Heights where the county owns the land under this, and we're going through a 6-month process to get the land decertified by FAA because we can't get the financing for the project because of the ground lease. So ground leases add a problem because if you're a bank and there's a problem, one entity owns the land, one person owns the building. So you've got, how do you deal with that? So that's something in the current financial market that people, the banks don't like it. They're gonna make you pay more for that type of an arrangement. And in some cases, they just don't want to finance that type of structure. So we're seeing that in a lot of places. Chagrin Highland, we ended up going back to the city council in Cleveland and asking to be able to sell more of the land because ground leasing it was not working. And as I said, I've got another example where right now I'm negotiating for a client that we can't do the ground lease. They can't get the financing that they need for the period of time, et cetera. So that's the cautionary note on ground leases. It sounds great. We'll have a permanent money coming into our community. But if the developer can't finance it and the project doesn't work with it, then all you're doing is putting another roadblock in place to getting something in that's going to provide dollars to your community through taxes. So,
And I think on the Cleveland Heights model, Bryce, would you want to describe a little bit about the structure of that financing and the challenges it's presenting there?
Yeah, the top of the hill site is similar in scale and financial investment. So you're looking at about a $72 to $75 million project. Similar in scope, a little bit more residential in that case. There's a hotel component. There's some new retail. There's a parking garage, and they've structured a 30-year full TIF out there. So all the money that's being generated in that site is going right back into it. And that structure works. It's not meant to slight them. It's meant to say that structure is working for that community. That's not the case here. And I would say that the simple reason is that it really gets us to the structure that's in front of us, is that we don't have TIF or tax abatement tied up into the property because the developer is going to get to own the land. That's a huge component of it. And I do want to say, the city is investing in this project. We're not giving anything away. In fact, in my opinion, in the profession that I'm in, it's a great way to invest your money into the community that we spend so much time talking how great the marketplace is. What better opportunity for the city to put public money and get long-term revenue generation via multiple sources than a real estate development project? So for me, just from the financial perspective, I think it's a great way that we can invest our dollars.
Thanks. If, again, there's no objection from council members, we'll take the docket comment at this time. We do have two folks that are signed up to speak today, and the first is Dave Wondolowski.
Good evening, council, mayor. It's the first time I've been to your council chambers. It's nice here, roomy. I came here tonight to talk about this development on 1 Lakewood Place. I myself was a councilman in Broadview Heights, 2003 to 2007. At the time, we were building 500 to 600 homes a year in the city. That's a lot of houses. And never once did we have an opportunity to have a development like this here. Now, one thing I liked about my days on council was is when we get to honor a softball team for winning a championship or a group of Boy Scouts for some good community work they did. But these are the days I didn't like, right? Because now we have to examine this comprehensive, complex real estate proposal that very few of us lay people understand. And I get that. I get it. And I sympathize with all of you. For 15 months of going through this, it becomes numbing after a while. But let me just tell you that this, in my experience, and we're now in a capital strategies program, we're investing our own pension dollars in the city of Cleveland. To date, we've got about $150 million of our own money working in the city. Any community in Cuyahoga County would kill to have this kind of development opportunity. And Broadview Heights still today, Mayor Sam Ally would love to have this. Okay, in Brecksville, one of our contractor developer partners, the DiGeronimo's, just took over the VA property. And if you think that you're giving a little bit away here, wait till you see what they get. Because Mayor Ruby's going to lay it on there, because there's a site that's been sitting there for years and years and years. It's been vacant. I don't know how many years. It's probably been a couple of, I don't know, maybe Tracy, a couple of decades, maybe, I don't know, a long time. 20 years. Until they were able to get somebody to come in and take a look at it, redevelop it. Okay? Now, I know there's a lot of progressive people in Lakewood, and that's good, because this is progressive. This is a progressive project. And what you don't want to do is let this one get by you and have that hospital sitting there for 20 years. I wouldn't want that albatross around my neck as a council person. I know that. That's the difference between me and a lot of other people, is I sat in the seat you sat in. So I understand it. I also appreciate the questions and the dialogue that go along with this. That's important. You would not be doing your jobs if you didn't ask the questions you're asking. And I know it's a complicated process, and I'm sure that there are people that probably don't want this project built, and I understand that too. It's an important job for the building trades. We certainly support the Corys in their investment here, and I hope that you all vote for it. We'll be attending the next few meetings, and you're going to hear from my colleague here in a minute, but the room's kind of small, so I didn't want to fill it up with all of our Lakewood residents, but if that's what you'd like, let me know. I'm trying to be sympathetic to your time, so thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you. Next up is Terry Joyce.
Tough act to follow. Through the chair, council president, to the mayor and his team, and the Carnegie management. Although I don't live in Lakewood, I think Councilman O'Malley knows I've often said it, being in West Park, I feel like I eat, drink, and play here. And that's kind of what I told the Carnegie team when they first engaged us. Although I'm not a resident, back to my Lakewood softball rec days, and you teaching my daughter how to swim and shoot a basketball at your Lakewood Y. She's only 8, so I'm an old dad. Don't judge. You know, I just have a real hearts, you know, a real spot for the city of Lakewood, and I will say it's not too often that that a development team engage us from the very onset. A lot of times, because we're the labor, we feel like sometimes we're the back end. We don't know about a project until we're sending laborers or electricians that are here tonight, or some of our various tradesmen and tradeswomen to the job site. But here, from a very onset, Carnegie reached out to us, and they did it because they wanted it to be a community effort. They wanted to make sure that we had people to send to this project. I didn't know until I sat in their offices that they had already engaged with Turner, as you know, that build out your school system here. And I can't tell you how many times we got calls from Turner saying, "You got any Lakewood residents? We're building the high school. It would be really neat. It'd be really neat for the school board, of which I have a lot of friends on your school board. We'd really like to see some. You got any Lakewood High School members that are working in the trades?" And I said, absolutely. we're going to get people to build your community from your community. And when Carnegie engaged us, and I mean, it was like we were singing the same song. And I think that'll be a huge benefit to the city. As Dave said, you have to do your due diligence. You have to kick the tires and make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. But for the building trades, for a Lakewood resident by proxy, I'm not sure, some attorney will tell me that's not the right way to put it, but we really want to see this project going forward. I think, as was stated earlier, the trend is now to live in downtown, to walk to work. I mean, these kids nowadays, they want to take that car payment and that insurance off their docket. We can't build it quick enough in downtown Cleveland. I could go ad nauseum on the projects that are in the pipeline, are under construction, are just completing, and why we're well north of 90% vacancy down there. I can see that happening in Lakewood. I can see it to people like Carnegie that are here to stay. They're only a suburb away. They're corporate headquarters. So I know they're in it, and we're in it with them. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
Yes, Councilman O'Malley.
Can we, we've talked about the fact that there are anywhere, based on projections, between 550 and 1,000 people who would come into this site as either new residents or new employees. But we haven't talked much about the aspect of construction jobs. I don't know if George or Rustin would be able to talk about, what they're looking at in terms of payroll for that aspect of this, and how many construction jobs would be created as a result of this.
Thank you for the question, Councilman. The project, because it has a duration of 2 years under construction at least, it varies the actual number of jobs that are created over that time period, but I mean, in the beginning, you might have as little as 80, but as we get deep into the project, there could be hundreds. Overall, what we're projecting right now is at least 600 jobs that are going to be created on the construction side alone. So those would be all, obviously, the various disciplines in that regard. But as far as, and I think, did that answer your question, by the way?
Thank you. Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, so appreciate that. And
Sorry, go ahead.
got a number of those folks here tonight, several of whom live in my ward. It's good to see and glad they're here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final thoughts or questions or comments from council before we move on to the community gathering space portion of the meeting?
Mr. President?
Yes.
A reflection that for Lakewood strategically, this is a big opportunity because we are not, if you look at different communities, I've had the benefit of talking over the years about budgets and tax encroachment by the state on cities and economic development strategies. And it turns out, which is something that's obvious once you think about it, but it's not obvious until you do, that cities are very different, and they have different employer mixes, and therefore they have different tax structures. And so if you're Fairview Park or Rocky River or Beechwood, you have a certain tax structure. If you're the Village of Orange, you have a different tax structure, and now you got to really change it. And if you're the city of Lakewood, does it work for us to rely on industrial employee taxes or commercial employee taxes? Really, that's a small component. What we have always been is a city of homes and neighborhoods, and so the residential, it's the residents here, really much more than the workers here who have paid the lion's share of property and income tax. So what would we do in Lakewood if we wanted to diversify that and be a little less reliant on the residential contributions to the tax base? What would our options be? The mayor talked about how an optimal strategy for industrial would be, well, you'd have 40 acres of green space. You'd build on 20. If things went well, you'd build on the other 20. And if things went really well, you build on the other 40 empty acres next door. Well, Lakewood doesn't have that. Are we going to compete with Rocky River and Fairview Park for the giant shopping mall zones, or Crocker Park for that? Probably not. So what we do have is commercial office as well as retail. And it's office that's going to pay into our coffers because they chip in more than they consume. Retail is important, I think, as an amenity to our community. It's a quality of life thing. It's something we're extremely proud of, the artisan, locally owned, unique experience you can get in Lakewood. But in terms of a sheer tax contribution, it's something, but it's not the main driver. This project could change or begin to give us more of a toehold in serious commercial office, especially since we just lost New York Life, which was our biggest non-schools, non-hospital employer. And that was a blow, and that was in no small part because of the quality of the office space. So the point is that if we hit this ball out of the park, then we get another chance to hit the next ball out of the park, because seems like real estate loves nothing more than following upon a proven success that somebody else just demonstrated could be successful. We've had that begin in our residential rehab market and our residential new construction market. This would be a major first step in our commercial office market. So even beyond just the significance of this project and its geography in the downtown, it's a whole new trajectory potentially for our city to become not just a place people live, but a place where a lot of people also work at higher income levels and do a lot more intensive kinds of work. That occurred to me as the greater context of what this project is and could be for our community. Thanks.
Thank you. With that, I guess I'll turn it over back to Bryce for some comments on or some, I guess, recap and additional discussion on the community gathering space.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to be aware of your time and everybody that's here's time. It's about a little before 7:30. How much time do you think we've got?
Can folks do 8? Is that agreeable?
Okay.
Does that, proportionally or in perspective, how crunched are you right now?
That's plenty.
Okay.
That's plenty of time. We may not even need it. We spent a lot of time thinking about this past week based on the deliberation and conversation we had with you last Monday, and I just wanted to share a lot of that with you. And my guess is you're going to have a lot of feedback again. But again, we wanted to spend a bunch of time tonight thinking about this. So following our conversation on Monday night, we started to challenge ourselves on, are there other communities, are there other cities around us in the region, in this country, and even across the world that are approaching public space the way that we've got it structured in the term sheet. And we came across something called POPs, privately owned public spaces. This is something that is common in 2 major cities in the United States, New York City and San Francisco, have been working on this specific topic for decades. In fact, New York's got about 500 privately owned public spaces, and San Francisco is slowly working their way up. And both of them actually started in a similar scenario where they had a development project that wanted to work in outdoor community gathering space, and so they've over time structured it as publicly accessible, privately owned space. So it's everything from indoor to outdoor space. It can be a widened sidewalk, it can be an outdoor community gathering space like we have, or it can be a public plaza. San Francisco, New York, and dozens of other cities that we researched, all of them approach it differently. Through the zoning code, through development agreements, there is not one consistent approach. 3 very consistent things across all of these projects are the 3 bullets that are up on the screen. Well-designed, well-constructed, an operations and maintenance plan that is in place before you lay a brick in the ground, and that the space is welcoming and vibrant. If you nail those 3 things in any outdoor urban space, you got it right. And that's really important to understand because we worked really hard to put us in a position to deliver it the way that it's structured right now. Sorry. The screen is San Francisco's active POPs. They call it POPOs in San Francisco, but they're mapping these things so you can find them. If you're a resident or citizen that's in their downtown and you're looking to see where spaces are, they're publishing this on their website. And New York has something very similar, where you can learn about how these are structured, who owns them, and when am I allowed to access them. So both of these two cities have a ton of these in place. So that took us down a path of other cities that are doing it. So we'll start from the furthest away from us, which is in London and Granary Square. This site is quite a bit larger than our site, but has a lot of similar components that the Carnegie team is talking about. One of those things is outdoor dining. You all are very familiar with our thriving outdoor dining patios up and down our commercial corridors in Madison and Detroit. Carnegie is looking to pick up on that same rhythm and approach. And so this is an example of a structure in London where you've got both of those things. Maybe the outdoor space that is enjoyed by people that are just passing through, but also people that are enjoying a cocktail, a drink, or even lunch on a patio space. Paley Park in New York City, arguably one of the strongest examples of privately owned public space. This is quite a bit different than our space in that this is, in New York, used as a point of relaxation to get away from the hustle and bustle of New York streets. You'll see a waterfall in the background, and when you go to this space, you pick all the noise of the city goes away, so it's almost just a nice place to relax. But just another example of, from its onset, was envisioned and executed as a private space that's just publicly accessible for people as they're walking by. And then the one that's closest to us is the Columbus Commons, the city of Columbus. Another example of something that's quite a bit larger than our site, but is being executed the same way that we are showing it here tonight. So a privately owned public space that was tied to development that was happening around it. It is managed and operated by a private owner and is treated as a public space. In addition to some of the research that we did in some other communities, we also revisited Carnegie's Round 2 proposal. And I won't read through these, but I thought they were relevant to bring back up. These are direct quotes from Carnegie's proposal on what they intend to make this space. Be the center for civic life. Could include water features, infrastructure for events like farmers markets, outdoor dining and seating, landscaping, lighting, maybe even a stage for performing arts. This is directly from a team that envisioned this in the fall, wanting to design the space for 10 people, wanting to design the space for 100 people. We need to be able to execute both of them. And so we took that Round 2 proposal and we structured what is in front of you in the term sheet. A question came up last week on what are the controls that we have in place about this space. And so I wanted to daylight what's in the term sheet right now. So in section 2D, we have set and established a minimum of half an acre for this outdoor community gathering space, and that also it needs to be constructed in a first-class manner and also be maintained in a first-class manner over time. Section 3B, this brings Planning Commission and ABR into the term sheet. And as many of you know, we hold both of those boards up very high in this community. And their process as a part of the plan development rezoning process is going to be critical as a part of this project. And so they will help us to define what first class means by their standards of design and our standards of use with the Planning Commission. This has a continuing developer responsibility for maintaining the plaza, which is not held on the taxpayers. This is on the private developer to maintain. They are in charge of the programming of the plaza. And the city will also have access to the public plaza for community events. In section 3C, it talks about an adopted operations and maintenance plan that must be in place. And where I started in our research in London, in New York, in San Francisco, People that are in my job in those cities say that that is the most critical component of these sites. And that when you come out of the ground and the space is beautiful for the first couple of years, you need to make sure that you've got a plan in place to make sure that it stays in a first-class condition for the long term. And that's what we've structured as a part of this term sheet. So in addition to the term sheet controls that are in front of you, we also took it a step further, which is the step that follows what's in front of you today and is a critical part of the project. The plan development rezoning process is going to talk about this project as a whole, the office component, the retail, the Curtis block, the parking garage, landscaping. It's also going to specifically talk about how the community gathering space is used. Remember, City Council holds that vote. It will be introduced on City Council's docket and then sent to our Planning Commission, sent to our ABR. Both of those bodies will go through 2 votes, preliminary vote, Planning Commission, preliminary vote at ABR, and then final votes at both boards. That entire package is then delivered back to you for approval. And so the zoning piece is a really important control that the city maintains. Even in the zoning code in 115601, it talks about these projects having an open space component. So before the project even came to us, our zoning code was trying to envision that these spaces would exist. So we take that a step further. What would the Planning Commission member, how would they address this topic? First, they would ask us, what is the definition of this plaza? What is the definition of the community gathering space? And so something that we would start with is the public plaza is privately owned public open space, which is defined as an area or areas designed for use of the general public while owned and maintained by private owners. That structure can be made part of the land use decision, that is the zoning process. In addition to that, our Planning Commission and ABR will also talk about what we would call maybe incidental things that could happen in this space. So that's the second italics in bold section up on the screen. If you wanted to do an ice skating rink in the winter, if you wanted to do a kiosk cafe, if you wanted to do tents for farmers markets, which we've brought up a few times in this room. The other challenging question that we were asked on Monday of last week, which was a good one, is how do we protect this space for the long term? When another council member is in your seat 10 years from now and there's an idea to put a building on this section, what do? Well, that's classified and addressed in the zoning code. That would be classified as a major modification, and that major modification is required today to go through the same process that we would go through for the entire project. They have to pitch that to City Council. They have to pitch that to the Planning Commission, get a preliminary vote, get a final vote. Same thing with ABR, and it would come back to City Council for a final vote on a modification to the plan development zoning. And at that time, our elected officials may think that that makes sense for them. And in my opinion, that's okay. We should allow that process to happen. That structure is not found in your term sheet, but is a tool in our existing code that we can utilize and should utilize to protect the project. Maybe 20 years from now, that use will change. And our planning commissioners and our public, the community, our elected officials should be able to make that determination. And so that's the way it's established today. Another question we got last week was, how do community events work? City-sponsored or non-city-sponsored? And so we started to think through how we currently handle our special event process. And the way that we envision it is working with our team at Carnegie to come up with a similar process, where if there was a city-sponsored event, that they would fill out a form that Carnegie would be a signatory to. That would go for maybe a city-sponsored event. For a non-city-sponsored event, let's say a yoga studio wants to partner and do a class on a Saturday morning. The city doesn't need to be involved in that decision. Our hope is that our partners at Carnegie are developing very robust long-term relationships with organizations, businesses in our community to do just that. So we envision maybe even an application process that Carnegie could develop so people could access that space without the city's involvement. And that healthy activation of the space is exactly what we're looking for. And that takes me to sort of what I wanted to wrap up with, which is going back to the development objective that we showed last Monday, specifically on this space, which was to design Lakewood's finest multifunctional outdoor community gathering space. If we make this space vibrant, if we make it beautiful, and if we make it welcoming, it'll be a grand slam for our community. The structure established in your term sheet tonight can execute this, and it gives us the best chance to really execute that for the long term. So, Mr. Chair, I don't have anything else prepared tonight, but be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate those comments. Again, this was in response to a conversation that we had the previous week in which a lot of council members were concerned about both the ultimate arrangement for the ownership of the public space as well as how that might be handled going forward. So I think we've heard definitely a good amount of thought put into that since then from planning and development. Any comments or questions about what we just heard? Councilman Litton, do you have one, and then Councilman Bullock, or? Okay, alphabetical order it is, Councilman Bullock.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good discussion. Thanks, Planning Director Sylvester, for the very responsive and thoughtful walkthrough of what we already have. We got a lot of ammunition, in other words, in our existing process to address questions just like this, and we've been building towards exactly this kind of a space and opportunity for some 10 years. So that's all encouraging. A couple of additional follow-on questions and comments, though. George, would there be a Carnegie site manager of the privately owned public plaza? Presumably there would. Is it the same person as the building custodian or superintendent? I think they'd call it on a big site like that. Or you're going to have a separate division or person at least who would spend a lot of time thinking about and managing the site?
There would be an on-site building supervisor. But let me also emphasize that, you know, Carnegie is literally right next door, and we have our entire property management team virtually within a 10-minute drive at the most. But having said that, we do plan on having an on-site manager. We also intend to have a marketing and event coordinator that would work in concert with whatever the requests or needs are for the plaza, and obviously for the city as well. We're anticipating that that's going to be a programming effort that we collaborate on together. Over in every year virtually, it would be an effort to go and program and plan what's happening for that space. And we think that that's something that you know, we're welcome and that we think is an asset. It's an amenity that we want to help sell with our tenants. And you know, we know that the city has already talked about reserving so many days exclusively for them. But we intend to have that team in place to address those needs.
Thank you. A couple other points. I can imagine a need for some kind of dispute resolution over use. So let's pretend for the moment that Carnegie wanted to put up very ugly snowman banners all over this plaza, and it's, you know, well past St. Patrick's Day, and there's blaring Christmas Carol music going on and on and on and on, and people in the community just think it's terrible. Now, you probably will respond to customers, but you could, maybe somebody else could think up a different example where you like use in a certain way, others in the community or the city don't. Who gets to make the call? If it's privately owned, I think it's Carnegie, right? We're not used to this kind of a decision right now because most of the public spaces are city-owned and juried.
In the mayor's office, we deal with just those issues every day. Every day.
Yeah.
So reconciling various different neighbors' expectations of what happens in their neighborhood. So, you know, as a practical matter, those are, well, the case you cite is probably an extreme one and maybe a simpler one. Many of the issues are not so simple about different tastes, different expectations, and norms. The fact of the matter is, we work through those and mediate and resolve them. And so the idea of a private property owner and its impact on the neighborhood is part of, I think, the role that city council folks plays. You deal with these issues too. And oftentimes it's about getting folks in the right room together and trying to understand each other more successfully and making decisions. You do it. I know the mayor's office does.
Well, in addition to that, and if I may add, Mayor, we're going to be establishing, as Bryce had discussed, an operations and maintenance plan. That operations plan is going to identify criteria that we need to abide by. That will include rules and regulations. Will it be as comprehensive? Will it be all encompassing? I mean, obviously there are circumstances that may arise that we couldn't foresee, but generally speaking, this is not unusual for us. I mean, whenever we are dealing with any kind of a common area that's a part of a project that we own, we have to address this issue every time we go and develop it. It's not only a concern of the public and of the community, but it's also a concern of our tenants. This is something that I think is going to be very well articulated, and you'll see exactly what that is to give you the assurances that those kind of problems will be minimized. Now, again, you know, you never know. You can't obviously legislate against every contingency, but using what the mayor just discussed, I think that we'll have it fairly covered in that regard.
Yeah, agreed, and it's fairly said that this is hardly a new issue for property managers who have multiple tenants and the public coming back and forth, and neighbors in all directions. So you've got some experience. I just think it behooves us to anticipate, and I also would suspect that you'll find that Lakewood's on the higher end of the engagement spectrum, like maybe through the
Through the spectrum?
yeah, through the spectrum in a whole new different order of magnitude. For the city leaders here, who designs the design? I think that is a big question for me, and I personally would not like to hand this off to ABR or Planning Commission sight unseen and have kind of a baked design come back to council for approval. I mean, council typically, although we approve, don't edit line by line the Planning Commission and ABR deliberative decisions and recommendations. It's rare. This might be the type of issue that would trigger a council review. But even so, I think that, I guess the process I'd envision or propose would be that we spend some time getting together beforehand on some common ground vision for what the space looks like, what's it used for. I mean, we've done that partly, but there's more to go, I think, is my point. And I know council shouldn't be trying to determine the color of the stripes on, you know, or even the final form of the building materials and how it's all clad, but we don't have to get that detailed to still get into meaningful and important decisions. So I'd invite just more time to devote to that, so we have some common vision. And again, there's a difference in what a community and a public entity does versus what a private entity does, even as high quality of a privately owned, publicly accessible plaza as you envision. There are going to be differences, and we don't have to prevent or fix or solve all of that, but again, let's anticipate it is I think a major point I'm trying to make. Final point is we do have the acreage question. The term sheet proposes a minimum. The minimum doesn't have to be the final number, but whether a half acre versus 0.7 acres is enough or not enough gets us into that very question about what does the design look like. Mm-hmm. So I don't actually know myself whether, it doesn't seem as if the term sheet is broad, flying from 35,000 feet, or maybe a better analogy would be it's just laying out the outlines of the foundation of the agreement with the details to be built up to follow. I'm getting into some of the details to follow, but how do I know if the foundations are correct now without looking ahead a little bit? That's the dilemma that presents itself on this. And Carnegie, my apologies in a certain way. I mean, you're being dragged into a family discussion on the public side, at least by me, when really your primary focus is the private ownership. And I don't have a philosophical problem with the private ownership structure, especially if it's going to make everything you do more successful. But in the meantime, there's a lot of, I think a lot of Lakewood residents are going to care quite a lot about how this space looks, feels, is used, how successful it is. I think I'm repeating myself, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, I could respond, and then I'll throw it over to you, George. So, Councilman Bullock, I absolutely agree with the last sentence that you just said. I think many members of our community are going to, I think they're going to define the success of this project through how we execute this space. I really do believe that. There's very important components of this, but I think a lot of people really want to sink their teeth into the design of this space. So to answer your question, in the term sheet, the planning director and the city architect are both formal members of the Carnegie design team. So that's structured in the term sheet, that we are one unit. And it was for exact moments like this, where we do want a formal seat at the table on design decisions. So that's the first thing. The second is that plan development zoning process. We envision it just as you described it. In fact, we had a meeting on Friday with their design team to talk about that. And the approach is we'd like to see the next iteration of the design of the project and specifically the community gathering space, and then take that on the road. We want to go to community meetings on Bell and Marlowe. We want to meet with Lakewood Alive. We would like to come to a council meeting. We would like to discuss with the community specifically the questions that you raised to inform the design through the plan development process. Planning Commission and ABR's role in that is really just going to be, are we in the right ballpark? You know, is this what you envisioned on the design, ABR? And Planning Commission is the use about what you envisioned for this space. But the community, the city administration, and the Carnegie team are really going to work hand in hand to deliver the design that you talked about. So George, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think that's, I'd like to just emphasize that this is truly a collaborative effort. We see that. We know that. We want to pursue that. And in so doing, the project is going to metamorphosize. There's no way in which you could articulate at this point, and that's one of the things that we stressed very rigorously when we were talking with Bryce and his team. One of the concerns that we had is having the flexibility, allow us to do and go out there, market it, explore, give us what we do best to make this project successful. We want it to be transformative, we want it to be sustainable, we want it to be successful, we want it to be there long term, we want it to be something that you're proud of, and we understand that there's going to be a significant amount of input so that everybody identifies with it. But in so doing, that inherently indicates that it needs to be flexible, and it needs to have that kind of outside exposure that will give you the opportunity to be responsive like that. And in our effort, when you talk about the 0.5 or the 0.7, what we've said is we can give you a minimum, and we can pursue the 0.7, but do we really know exactly what's going to happen with the massing of the buildings? No. Do we really know exactly what the landscaping is going to be at this stage? Not really. The point is that to have that flexibility is absolutely critical, and it allows you, as the city and the community, the planning and all the advisory boards, to provide the input and allow us to manipulate that in a way that still allows us to keep focused on what ultimately we all want, and that's the success of this project. So that's kind of, I think, and I believe that what Bryce is talking about is this putting it on the road kind of approach is exactly going to do that. It will give that flexibility. With that flexibility, we'll be able to accommodate that kind of input, and you'll see then ultimately what you're hopefully going to like and support.
Thank you. I think we'll go Councilman O'Malley and then Councilman Litton and then
Thanks. Just a comment. First of all, I've been to several concerts and festivals at Columbus Commons. Didn't know until tonight that that was a private space. Probably a sign that they're doing it right.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was Councilman Bullock or Councilman Rader maybe mentioned last week about some possible First Amendment issues coming up with this space. Obviously, it's a private space. this is Lakewood. I would imagine that there are some folks who might want to use it for something more political or controversial than a yoga class. So just to be prepared for that eventuality, and if that's in the contingency plan, that'd be helpful. And then also some guidelines around amplification at that space too, just so Councilman Litton doesn't get a whole lot of phone calls from Councilman O'Leary too. Thanks.
Thank you.
If I could comment on the First Amendment piece, that's an
Sure.
important element. Fact is that First Amendment right is exercised all the time in our city, and that's a good thing. Often it's on public right-of-ways, sidewalks. That's a good thing. There'll be plenty of sidewalks in and around this site and everywhere else downtown. We actually have a very sensitive approach to protecting our park space for general use as well. We don't want one particular group to outmuscle another group. It's for everyone to experience in a public. So even though a protest might be requested in Lakewood Park or Madison Park, we're sensitive through the special application process how we can manage that successfully so that a protest can happen, if so, safely and successfully without infringing on the rights of the other folks who might not share that view, who also have a right to be in that park. So the fact of the matter is we reconcile these issues today in a variety of contexts. We've had many requests for such protests, and generally speaking, the protesters prefer to be on the right-of-way. It's a safe spot for them. They're welcome to it at any point in time, and there's a lot of it in this town, and it's highly visible. So the fact of the matter is we accommodate that in a variety of ways today, but also protect basically our other public spaces for general use as well. And I suspect that would be the same experience that would apply here.
Thanks. Councilman Litton?
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to start, I have thought about this for the last few days. Actually ran into a constituent at the grocery store, talked about it there. Giant Eagle's a great place to meet your people. But anyway, I'm pretty well convinced in Carnegie's desire right now to their commitment to the public space, to keeping this a public space. And I understand, Director Sylvester, the hurdles that would exist for anyone in the future that might want to change it from being a public space. And I would add to that that the new residents of this space will probably have a bone to pick with anyone wanting to change a space that they've enjoyed for a number of years. But nonetheless, I guess I want to acknowledge that in 20 years, if this is really successful, the cheapest route will still be to develop the open space next door rather than to build up or look elsewhere. And so there's a part of me that wants to see something, or at least us to consider something in the use agreement that would keep it public either in perpetuity or for a really long period of time or something like that. And I would add that, and this is a layman talking, but I don't know that that diminishes the value of this project to, nor anyone's ability to market it over the next several months or a year or two. And so I guess I wondered if we could consider that, or if you have any comment on that possibility now.
Yeah, it's a great question. Turn over to Robin, who's thought a little bit about it too.
Yeah, I would just say that that is what's contemplated to be integrated into the development and use agreement, where we'll have a little bit more meat on the bones of what the minimum devoted to this, how it's defined. But most importantly, we contemplate that there be a restrictive covenant that would reflect that. And again, both the development and use agreement and some sort of restrictive covenant would be filed in the real property records. So we're confident in Carnegie, and that's not what you're concerned about. It's what happens 20 years from now, 25 years from now, when it's not your original developer who owns it. Market conditions have changed. And the value of something being recorded in the real property records, a restriction, is that it requires whoever owns it, if they want to change it, and there may be really good reasons to change it in the future. I mean, most good projects have to be reinvented on a every 20 to 30 year basis. That's a common thing. but they're going to have to come back to the city to request approval to change the dimensions. And we don't want it to be so restrictive again that they can't do what is necessary. So this is part of why the value of coming up with a minimum, it's not designed to be actually what they're going to do. And every single time they tweak it, or they put in a new patio, or they put in a ice cream sandwich kiosk or something that they need to get approval. You don't want that level of control, but you want a level of control that fundamentally the bargain, the investment that you've made in this project is not lost. And we can absolutely, in addition to the zoning, requirements, all of the other controls that Bryce laid out will be in a recorded development and use agreement, recorded against the property in the real estate records, and there can be a restrictive covenant that will help to protect that. So there's lots of belts and suspenders here to protect the use that is contemplated.
Certainly part of an ongoing conversation. And just a quick follow-up question, with apologies, and I suspect it as a short answer or a quick answer, but because it is a privately owned space, I guess I want to clarify that it still would be held to the same accessibility standards or ADA standards that a public space would or might have, just simply so that we're protecting our residents who may have a disability and would need to access the space in a wheelchair or whatever the case may be. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Anderson and then Councilman Rader.
Yeah, just real quick, to our friends from Carnegie, are there any current holdings, any current developments in which you have privately owned public spaces?
Well, yes, in fact, really, whenever we develop a shopping center, for example, we have public areas that we virtually allow any licensee or any invitee to take advantage of. And so we would liken that to be similar to this.
Can you provide some examples? Cities that you partner with in a way that you represented that you might be able to coordinate with the mayor?
As far as a partnership is concerned, I don't think we have done anything in partnership with the city, but we have had public spaces, yeah, that we regulate and that we permit without actually having an agreement with the city. Sure. Basically, the common areas that the public can take advantage of for any reason.
Mm-hmm. So the coordination, which you sort of subscribed as would be a good process when you guys had your back and forth with Mayor Summers, can you provide any examples, specific examples in your current holdings, your current portfolio development where that sort of relationship currently exists?
I'm trying to think off the top of my head if we have anything specifically that was a city and developer partnership.
To this degree, that sort of mimics what we're suggesting here.
I don't think we have in our portfolio to this degree. Do we, Rustin? I don't think so.
I was just going to add, not particularly with a city, but there are organizations who we've partnered with at centers to host events that can be very complex.
And I think well, thank you for that. You used the term metamorphosize. And I think that's sort of what we're talking about here, just a general comment. We have the minimum that we have in what's being considered tonight is half an acre, 0.5 acres, right? So it's really about managed choice. And I think that's ultimately what, at least I'm trying to get my mind around, is what is the array of options as to what this space could look like, dimensions, et cetera. So I think that's, when I read the minimum of 0.5, that's what I have in my mind. So we sort of narrow it to a degree as to what it's going to be. But like you said before, George, it's going to be hard to really see exactly what's going to be on this site until everything else is established.
And
but at least we have a minimum standard established.
And we need to, and I think both of us would like to have that. I think it's for our mutual benefit because it's a starting point.
And to your point from last time we met, Robin, to paraphrase, you commented that, and let me know if I have this completely off base, you made comments to the point that it's good for the financing, the private financing of such a project to have sort of clean deeds, clean transitions of space, et cetera, not to cloud it up with multiple entities on the same deed. And so the profile of tools that Bryce sort of articulated all of us through a few minutes ago, that sort of, you would have the same comments here in what we heard now, tonight, as the comments that you made a week and a half ago?
Yes, I certainly would. Just to give you walk through a scenario. If instead of Carnegie owning all of the property, some portion of it was owned by the city, some portion was owned by Carnegie, there's going to be different blocks that are devoted to different uses. Just imagine the complexity from a lender perspective, where they don't want to finance an office building that doesn't have the amenities of the outdoor dining areas, that doesn't have the amenities of the gathering space. I mean, those are things that Class A office space in the city of Cleveland cannot exist today without that kind of community gathering space amenities. Anybody who's gone downtown to go see what's happening at Key Tower, you can see the way the common spaces, even within the building, are being transformed. That's what's required today for, you know, a Class A office tenant. So a lender who's going to support Carnegie in doing this project is going to be looking for assurances that they're never going to be at risk of losing access to those amenities, because they're the project, the collateral for that they're, you know, loaning based upon depends upon it. These spaces are so integrated in their operation that it really, it's not impossible to finance projects like that, but really, really complex. And one question that I think you as a council need to consider is, how many layers of extra complexity do you want to add into what is already a challenging project? I mean, this is actually, you see from how many developers are competing for this opportunity. This project already has a lot of complexity in it. Most developers, in fact, all except Carnegie, asked for substantial amounts of public subsidy to move forward with it. So the question is, how many extra layers of complexity do you want, and what are you getting in return for it? And so I think that what Bryce has done a good job of laying out is we have worked hard to build into the project many ways of protecting the city's interests without creating additional financial burdens for the project, additional obstacles to it being developed. So we've tried to have a healthy balance that's really going to enable the project to move forward without jeopardizing any of the long-term interests of the city in the space.
You know, if I may underscore that for a moment for you, the only way we would have been able to make the proposal that we did was to have the ownership of the property and not ask for assistance from the city. Gotcha. You know, interestingly, as my mind was working here, it's been a while, but we did have a partnership I want to share with you. It was done about 25 years ago. I'm dating myself here, but and that's why probably I can't recollect it as quickly. But it was in Amsterdam, New York, actually. And there was a historic barn that was on the property. And the historic barn was very fundamental and very near and dear to the community. And we worked out a relationship or an agreement where not only did we have a mutual sharing of that common space, but also we entered into a development agreement that preserved it and that helped maintain it and decided exactly how it would be used and protected in perpetuity. And to my knowledge, I think that's still there today. I haven't visited lately, but I'm sure it is. And so that was an example of where we entered into a partnership with the city.
Thank you. And to your point, Robin, concerning Tower City and the entire Tower City complex, I believe that public access to those buildings was aided by the fact that urban development action grants were used about 30 years ago to rehab the avenue, and obviously there's public transportation in the basement, which further protects public access to those buildings. So, but I appreciate the analogy.
Yeah, I mean, many of the finest projects today that are privately owned have great public space in them and outside them. That's really what is, you know, placemaking. It really is the distinguishing characteristic today of Class A office space. It's not enough to have high-quality finishes within your office tower. You really have to be offering an experience to tenants that is worthy of the level of rents, and that's how you're attracting and retaining them. That's been true on the coasts for a long time, but we are clearly seeing that occurring in Cleveland, and where of the Class A office spaces, if you look at the way the atriums, the lobbies, the plazas, the neighborhoods are being developed, whether you be talking about Key Tower or 200 Public Square, the BP building, or the Flats East Bank, all of these spaces that offer Class A office amenities, which is what you're talking about, all of them have redesigned the common areas within the buildings, outside on the plazas, you know, in the neighborhoods. Those investments are necessary. You won't be able to attract the kind of office tenant without them. And so that shift has hit Cleveland, and this project will be competing against all of those places downtown. So, I mean, the good news is you have a complete alignment of Carnegie's interests and the city's interests in that high-quality finishes are necessary, incredible amenities, ones that people want to be with, that you've got to have the fantastic coffee shop, you have to have the ice cream shop, you have to have access to convenience retail, all of those things that, you know, the community really wants and will enjoy and appreciate on a summer night. They're the same thing that the office tenant is totally expecting. So we have a great alignment here, and what we need to protect against is not the short term, it's really just making sure in the long term we've protected the city.
Thank you. Councilman Rader.
Yeah, that was like 10 seconds. Because you half answered my question. I would like to see those levels of complexity, though. I just want to see the, like, what the actual steps would be to keep that public, just so we can vet it and really understand apples to apples, dollars to dollars, what that would take. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman George.
Thank you. I know we were discussing a lot of this public, and I just want to, you know, go on record and comment that, you know, I think Carnegie, you're going I don't question your commitment to the space. What I question is kind of what Councilman Litton brought up was 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years when Carnegie may no longer be involved and we have another developer. And if this public space doesn't remain public, then we lose control of that space. So I'm pretty adamant about this space remaining public. I'm still not convinced that the best route is to turn that over. I appreciate everything that's said so far. I see, you know, I see some pros to it, but I'm pretty steadfast in saying this public space should remain public so that we can control it, and that 20 years down the line we don't have some structure that none of us here today approved. So I just want to make that statement. I'm willing to more conversations, but that's I'm pretty steadfast on that.
Thank you for those comments. I do think, and in the interest of kind of getting to the bottom of that question a little bit, just briefly, although I know we're past our estimated stop time of 8 o'clock tonight. But what I guess I noted from our previous conversation this evening is that I think we did hear George Papandreou say that if Carnegie were to not own that space, that there would have had to have been a significant alteration in their proposal to the city, specifically in terms of a great deal more public financial support for this project. And so I think that in some ways we've heard at least part of that answer, and you know, we can get more detail, I think, as was partially requested by Councilman Rader, but I think that at least in my mind we have some of that clarity already. I don't know if that's a fair characterization.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Besides all the other comments that were brought up about this dichotomy between leasing and ownership, you know, the financing issues and everything else, and the whole concept of Class A office space and the amenities that you bring and the control that you're able to identify with your lenders and the financing, it wouldn't have worked any other way for us.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could, I mean, to add to that, you know, the zoning that would be established here would not allow us to do that without a vote of council. I need to reiterate that. If there was a modification proposed to this, it would require majority vote by city council, majority vote by the planning commission twice, majority vote by the ABR twice to change that use. It would be the same approach of any publicly owned land today. If there was a development proposal that the city wanted to entertain at that time, it would have to, there's an established process for them to go through. So it's not the case that you can just put a building up. You have to go through a very rigorous process to get it approved. And I think we have a lot of protections based on the process that's ahead of us.
Thanks. Yes, Ms. Nichols.
I just want to point out, having gone through the similar things down in the flats, that you'd also have to find a funding source to be able to build whatever it is you want to build, because now you're the city. They can finance it as part of their office development, but for you, if you wanted to own it, you'll have to find the financing. Then you'll have to budget the maintenance of this for the rest of eternity. And, I mean, when we looked at the flats, when I was at the city of Cleveland, that was a big issue for us. Who's going to maintain all this boardwalk? It's great to have public access. But then who pays for it? Who's going to maintain it, clean it, and then make sure that if the boards are bad, you're replacing it, you're doing all the things that are required. So I just want to make sure that everyone realizes that there are ways that Robin has discussed where you can have that control on the site that it remains public, without having to incur the cost and the maintenance that's going to be an additional burden on your community. So it's something you've got to think about.
And the liability.
Thanks.
I mean, that's exactly, thank you. That's what I want. I want to see what that would be on paper, the cost. I mean, just to do our due diligence as council, I think that's a very good point, and I think we should be looking at what that will cost. Even if it's exorbitant, I mean, I definitely want to still, I would like to see that. So, thank you.
Councilman Bullock?
Thanks. Ms. Nichols, I'm curious, what was the outcome with the flats? I do love that beautiful boardwalk, which is the first time, it's kind of awful to say, that I experienced the Cuyahoga River as a river. I think your mic's...
All the property there is owned privately, and we have deed restrictions that are in place, and we also have a situation where at the end of a period of time, the roads come back to the city, and it's a lot of restrictions based on, when you have 34 different funding sources, you're pleasing a lot of different people.
So that project is a good example of what Councilman Rader's asking for, is the side-by-side of the different ownership and financial structure and the complexity of how to skin the cat.
It's privately owned, so it's
Okay.
privately owned public
It's all-
space. So
okay.
it's very similar to this. But, I mean, we can obviously give you some idea of what the cost would be based on the acreage and how much it would cost to try to maintain something like this, and build it. I mean, we could give estimates, but, you know, it's a little different space than the flats area. But I'm sure we could come up with some numbers. But it is something to be kept in mind. I mean, every time the city of Cleveland looks at some new green space, we had to look at, okay, well, how much will it cost us to maintain this space? And so looking at having a private entity who's willing to take over the maintenance, I mean, that's a big thing for your budget.
And just to follow on, to summarize what I think I'm hearing from our expert presenters here to my council colleagues, I think we've got two different tools, and sometimes they work in partnership together, as is proposed here. You get the public screwdriver and the private wrench. You know, I'm making a crude analogy here. Different tools, different jobs. We've got a proposal for really nearly 100% private financing, and the reason that the deal is structured, the proposed deal is structured for our review, is because of that payment structure. And so it is possible to incorporate more public ownership and control if that's important, but what it'll involve is just public cost going significantly up, not just for the project negotiation to get it launched, but to maintain and continue it. So right now, what we have is a nearly 100% privately executed and operated vision, and I think what our the city's council is advising us is that we're on firm ground here because the private interests are so closely aligned with the community interests. So there could be times when that would not be a prudent partnership for us to contemplate, where we would want to maintain a public ownership stake, and even if that meant higher costs for us. And I think what the invitation to us to deliberate upon here is, you've got such enormous alignment between the private and the public here. Frankly, most of this is private, and we want to see the private success for the same reason we want to see any development succeed in the private side. It's just got this public space aspect, and as what we're learning is that you know, nearly everything that what we care about, the developer cares about too. So you know, I'm hopeful that if we do our visioning and our due diligence, that we can make this successful as proposed and envisioned. So, and Bryce, I also appreciate what you said before about the develop a design, a conceptual design, and take it on the road to get lots and lots of community input. I think that's going to be how we get the smartest design ultimately. George, I also heard what you said, essentially that even the acreage we don't know yet, because you don't know yourself what the massing of the buildings are and the margins are. So you're getting the minimums so that you can start to get those anchor tenants committed, and we build out from there. So that's
one other just small thing I wanted to mention about Carnegie's at least initially contemplated design is, I think, listening to community feedback. You know, they've really fronted the community gathering space on Detroit, and the primary means of access to the office building and the retail buildings will be through this space. It would be a highly unusual scenario where a developer and owner of retail or office space in that kind of setting, where the front door to their project is that open space, would be willing to say that they're going to leave it to the control of the city. And I'm sure they would trust this administration to do a good job with maintaining it, but for them, for the value of their investment, if you were to lose control and the budgets were to change and there weren't the dollars to maintain it, all of a sudden they're actually, their front door to their buildings become out of their control. And the design here in being responsive to, I think, some of the community's interests, make it much more complex to consider sort of an isolated park. If it was sort of a very isolated thing that wasn't deeply integrated into the project, you know, that's an easier thing to think about the city maintaining, owning, and maintaining. Here, it's literally the front door. It's how you enter the buildings. It's that is a much more complex structure operationally for someone to have confidence that their front door would be well maintained, you know, in that way, if it was going to be at the mercy of, you know, regular appropriations and a budget. So some of it is in being responsive to the community. It inherently needs to have a little bit more private control.
Councilwoman George?
Yes, just to continue on that line. Aren't there deals, though, that the space remains public, but the private developer would maintain the space, so we're not dealing with that issue of, you know, what's it gonna look like? Because I don't want to put an additional burden on our Public Works Department to maintain it. I think if we'd able to have Carnegie maintain the space, then their fears would be, you know, resolved, and then we're not putting the burden on our already very hardworking employees.
Yeah, so there certainly can be structures where private developers take on obligations to maintain improvements that are publicly owned. That's probably not that common, but anything can be agreed to in a contract. I think the question that I would ask is it the long-term ownership of the project, say 100 years from now, that is the greatest cause for concern for you, Councilwoman? Or is it how the space is going to be used while, Carnegie is, maintaining it and functioning as the, or any successor owner is doing it? Because those, I think, are slightly different issues. And given the size of this site, which it's big for Lakewood, but it's not that big of a development site, it could be very challenging to say, we're going to carve this out, and only this little piece will return to the control of the city. I don't know that ownership is really the most important feature. It's really the who controls it during that time period. And I am confident that Carnegie, in order to have a viable project, needs to have control of that space. Can't, certainly subject to restrictions, rules, policy, approaches, maintenance obligations, but it needs to have it integrated into the project to be successful. And they've also said to us that they would not be prepared to move forward without that. But it's consistent with what we would expect of a site of this size and where the public space is oriented. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Unless there's any additional pressing comments or questions for this evening, we're almost a half an hour past our projected end time. True, although if we had started at the usual 7:30 time, it would be almost 10 o'clock. And for some of us, it probably feels that way. So with no additional business before us tonight, move to adjourn. A motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion to adjourn? I just add my thanks again to everyone, both in the audience and our experts and partners who have joined us this evening for tonight's meeting.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, just a reminder, our team's available as you have questions. I'm sure we didn't address everything tonight, but please ask us questions. We're ready to answer them. And if we don't have the answers, we'll find them. So please bring them up if you guys have them. Thanks.
Thank you. And also, just a brief reminder, we'll be back here a week from today in the same place for more discussion. So thanks. All those in favor of adjournment say aye. Aye. All those opposed, we're adjourned.